Hey, it's Robo here, and even though I haven't been involved in the naming process for several years, I still get a ton of requests to help with naming projects, and so I thought that I might take a little bit of time to sit down and just give you all the basics of the naming process that I've used over the years, that you can go ahead and apply the practices and see if it works for you. I've developed this practice over 15 years. I've named a couple of hundred companies using this process, and close to 1,000 products naming this process. So it's had a lot of time-tested effort put into it, and hopefully it can do something for you. But typically in the naming process, there's really no right or wrong. The way I feel about a name has evolved over time. I used to put a lot more stock into naming than I do now. However, and that's because the way I see it is that, there's been so many companies that have done so well and their names, suck. And so really the success or failure of a company has less to do with the name than it does to do with the execution of the business model. That being said, I also like to say that, when all things being equal, a good name will kick ass. And there's a lot of reasons for that in the branding process. But for the intent and purposes of this, I thought I'd just lay this out. So essentially what I do first is I like to sit down and do a lot of brainstorming. And the way that I do brainstorming is that I take a look at the company itself. I take a look at the people involved. I take a look at the product and or service that we're providing. Most importantly, typically when I get involved in a naming project, I've already gone through the business strategy session with them and the branding session. So we already have a clear understanding of our unique reputation or our brand. And that's a whole other program and process. So that gives me an advantage when I'm developing a name, because I already have a platform to stand off of. In case you do or do not have that, it's a really important exercise to go through. But regardless of that, when we get to the naming process, we do start with the same thing. We look at the company, the product, the people, and we also incorporate the brand itself into that paradigm. And I recommend that everyone do brainstorming separately. And it's very simple. You just get out either your notebook and pen, or you get on your computer. It doesn't matter, whatever your choice is. I prefer, pen and paper. And you start coming up with keywords that reflect or remind what it is you want to represent for the company. And some fun techniques, I'll say this, those keywords, if you think about them in two categories. Category one is emotionally driven words, and category two is physical words. So I'll bounce back and forth. I'll have a column of emotion words that just reflect, the intellectual aspect of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And then I'll come up with a bunch of words that have physical nature. I might use colors, I might use structure, things like that. And to give you an example, years ago, we worked on a mortgage consumer advocacy mortgage company. They weren't a mortgage company. They were a overseer of people trying to save people from the debacle of the mortgage industry. And we ended up with a name called Giant Lion. And it just came out of this process of working on physical names. Actually, Giant Lion represented the big lions that are out in front of the homes. So it sort of had a double meaning behind it, which are always my favorite ones. I love names that have a story. And if you try to create some sort of storyline in your name, you'll always be very, very proud of the name. And you have a kind of an oh by the way behind your name, which is always really neat. So I like to, make sure that we use emotional words and physical words. So if I'm working on a company and we've defined their business to their brand identity is going to be clever or smart, when I start using emotional words, there'll be things like that. I'll use the word smart, talented, intellect, things like that. And then I'll jump over and I will play around with physical words, which, might be words like strong, building, just physical, fire type words that people can see in their mind. This is what you'd feel in your heart. This is what you'd see in your mind. And it's a nice exercise, play back and forth. Now, of course, these are just a jumbled mess, but in your endeavor, you'll come up with words that match what you're trying to do. If you're in the healthcare space, these are going to be things that have to do with the emotional feelings of health. These are going to be the physical attributes of health, and you play with that. And probably the best advice I can give is that I like to do a really intensive, balls out session. I sit down and we'll come up with 200 words that work. And then I like to rest. I don't ever choose a name from that session yet. I like to rest. I like to take that list, tear it out, carry it around with me. I might take a day or two, just reflect on some of those words that I had. And during that reflection process, I might come up with some more. And then I go back into balls out again. I don't ever take my name from the first set. The name may come out of the first set, but I always go back into heavy duty mode. I'll do another brainstorming session where I'll do another 100, 200 names, and I rinse and repeat. I'll do that maybe 3, 4, 5 times depending on the endeavor. The last time that I came up with a name, which was a couple of months ago for a new real estate brokerage company that we are going to position in the marketplace as sort of a new and energetic, modern real estate type company who also has a philanthropic nature, which is something that I do now. And they're going to give a home to homeless people in Africa for every home they sell here in the United States. And after a couple of weeks of this brainstorming back and forth using emotional and physical words, we had 8 or 10 names at the end of the day that we really liked, and we ended up with a name called Motive Real Estate, and it's because motive is, in the dictionary, it has a really neat aspect to it. So this is sort of the brainstorming aspect. Now, something else I'd like everyone to know when they're doing the naming project, you sort of need a filter. And there are several things that you can do. Some of the more technically related filters is just these few things. Is the name relevant? I'm not even sure if I spelled that right. Is the name relevant? Is it relevant to the endeavor? This is not required, but I like this. I like it when a name reflects the tone of the industry it serves. People will gravitate from that industry toward it faster if it does. I know names that don't do that and they still work out fine, but I like the names, and most consumers will like the names that have some sort of relevancy to the endeavor. Is it unique? This is really, really important. The truth is that we don't normally have too many opportunities when we get in front of a client to have them remember who we are. If your name is unique, that helps you set yourself apart from all of the other players in the space. And a lot of people tend to shy away from unique. And I've actually had business partners that that we've struggled with the names because they were too far outside of their comfort zone. And I always tell them, if it doesn't make you nervous, it's probably not any good. And so uniqueness needs to be part of the package. Is it easy to speak or say, read, and write? Nothing's more frustrating than the names that are just impossible to figure out. There's nothing more frustrating than names that you try to go find them later online and you just can't because they were trying to be way too clever with the spelling or the size of the word. Typically, the perfect name is between 7 and 10 letters or less. 4, I think, is in studies is actually the easiest to remember. It's really hard to be unique anymore with just a few letters. There's a lot of companies out there these days, but I really like to make sure that those apply. And then most importantly, does it match the brand? So you can go back and say, if I want my brand to be the smart brand, I want to go back and make sure that it matches what my brand is, because that is the quickest way to create a brand, is to make sure that everything ties together under the brand. So these are criteria that I run all the names through. It helps me weed them out a lot faster. Then I like to play some games with the names. One game that I really enjoy is the building. So I love to pretend that my name is on the outside of a certain building. I'll actually drive around town and find a building that I feel reflects the type of business that I want. And I'll sit out in front and I'll envision the name of the business on the front of the building as if we were already in business. And it's amazing when you start actually putting the name into context, how it will change your opinion. We've had several names in the past where we were really in love with them on paper. We were really in love with them in our heads. But when you started envisioning them on a building, on ball caps, things of that nature, once you start envisioning them in the context of using them, it can really change your mind. And it can really come up with some of the new ideas too. That's happened several times. So playing these games with the potential names, and I usually do that after I've sifted down, I've gone through and we've sifted down to, the short list. When you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 names, that's a really fun thing to do, is to start to, role play with those. I also pretend that I'm introducing it to someone in my mind. I pretend that I have to tell someone what the name is, and I like to see kind of the reaction I feel when I'm doing that. The other thing that you need to know and understand about naming, this may be the most important part, is naming a company or naming a product is quite a lot like naming a child. Is that the initial struggle to come up with the name you think needs to be perfect can be messy and difficult. And what you need to understand is that when you finally land on something, you probably will not find the perfect name. In fact, in all my years, I don't think that we've ever had the perfect name right off the bat in our minds. But what happens is that you start to use the name, you start to adopt, you just choose one. You just pick one of the top 4 or 5. If they meet these criteria and you've gone through this game process with those names, by the time you use the name, you get it on your business cards, you're out there in public, it's on a website, and by the time you've lived with it for about 6 months, you'll actually reflect back and think to yourself, how could we have even thought of any other name? This name was meant for this business. That happens almost every time. I can't think of a single time when, after using it, if we did the naming process right, that after using it for a little time, that we couldn't, my daughters, I can't think of them as any Ollie is Ollie and Scout is Scout. And so, it's coming up with the names is difficult, but now that's who they are. So I hope that this helps some of you, the people. I'll do this video for people who ask. I don't really do a whole lot of helping people with their naming, but I do think it's important. I believe I used to not put a lot of stock into naming right away, but now that I own my own companies and things like that, I realize now that how important it really is. It really does help. If you can get a name on it, it does help in your mind when you're trying to build out your business. And it's really more fun to be able to use a name instead of that business that we're working on. So I think it's one of the first steps that you need to take. It also forces you to clarify a lot of unanswered questions right out of the box. Thinking about your target audience, thinking about your products, thinking about the way your company is going to be positioned in the future, doing some daydreaming. I'm a big vision guy. So I hope this helps out. If you have any questions, let me know. I'd love to pitch in and help you any way I can. Thank you.